When she was just 22 years old, Rosemary Kennedy's powerful father made a terrible choice for her. He forced her to have a type of brain surgery called a lobotomy because he claimed she had intellectual disabilities. But that was only the start of a much darker and more complicated story. This is the story of Rosemary Kennedy, a young woman born into a family that was like American royalty, but who was condemned to a life of secrecy. Her story shows the chilling price of trying to be perfect inside of America's most ambitious family. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. The year was 1918. The world was fighting World War I, but inside a fancy home in Boston, a different kind of story was beginning. Joseph and Rose Kennedy, who were already a very powerful couple, were waiting for their third child. Joseph, who had made a fortune on his own, had huge ambitions. He wanted his family to have political power and be famous. Rose, who was very religious and just as strong-willed, was determined to raise a family that was the best at everything. They imagined their family as an American dynasty, a powerful family that would be important for generations. Because of this, every child born into the Kennedy family was expected to be perfect. On September 13, 1918, Rosemary Kennedy was born. At the time, the world was not only dealing with a war, but also with the deadly Spanish flu pandemic. Doctors and nurses were completely overwhelmed and stretched thin. This meant that when Rose Kennedy was ready to give birth, there was no doctor available to help. A panicked nurse, who was desperate to wait for the doctor, made a terrible and shocking decision. She told Rose to hold her legs closed to stop the baby from being born. For 2 long and painful hours, little Rosemary's head was stuck in the birth canal, which cut off her supply of oxygen. It was a scary and traumatic way to enter the world. The Kennedys probably hoped it was just a rough start, but it turned out to be the very beginning of Rosemary's tragic life. The new baby, Rosemary, came home to a family that was full of promise. Her older brothers, Joseph Jr. and John, were already showing the charm and smarts that would make them famous one day. So, the Kennedys had a clear plan for what success looked like. But as Rosemary started to grow up, small differences started to show. She was slower to learn how to crawl, slower to learn how to talk, and slower to do the things that her brothers and sisters did easily. Her family, especially her parents, Joseph and Rose, started to notice the crushing weight of expectation. The Kennedy home was a place of intense pressure. The father, Joseph Sr., demanded that all his children be excellent. He made them compete with each other and pushed them to always win. His sons, John, Robert, and Ted, would grow up to become some of the most powerful men in the nation. But Rosemary's struggles were a direct threat to the perfect image the family wanted to show the world. She wasn't just having a hard time, she was different, and in their eyes, imperfect. Because of this, the family began to form a cruel, unspoken plan for her. Even with her struggles, Rosemary had a personality that was remarkably sweet and gentle. Her mother, Rose, once said that Rosemary was so willing to try to do her best, so appreciative of attention and compliments, and so hopeful of deserving them. But this kindness didn't fit in with the competitive world of the Kennedy family. At the dinner table, her siblings would have quick, witty conversations, but Rosemary would sit quietly, often looking confused by their jokes. It wasn't just about being smart, her whole personality was different. But in a family that cared so much about success and appearances, being different was seen as a dangerous problem. As Rosemary got older, her parents tried to shape her into the perfect young lady. They hired private tutors and sent her to special schools. They were determined to fix her, but she continued to struggle. She did learn to read and write, but only at the level of a 4th grader. When she was 15, she was becoming a beautiful young woman, and her parents decided on a new plan. They sent her away to a convent school, a Catholic school run by nuns called Sacred Heart in Rhode Island. This wasn't just any school, it was a strategic choice. Her parents told the nuns to teach Rosemary in a separate classroom away from the other students. They said this was to give her more one-on-one attention, but the real reason was to keep her learning problems hidden from their high society friends. Her difficulties were a secret that had to be kept, all to protect the flawless image of the Kennedy family. The debutante's dangerous secret. In 1938, Joseph Kennedy reached a new level of success when he became the American ambassador to the United Kingdom. This was a huge deal, and the family became incredibly famous and influential. High on their new power, Joseph and Rose made a bold decision. Rosemary would be introduced to society as a debutante at Buckingham Palace in front of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. This was an event with an incredible amount of pressure. The rules of the palace were very strict. Rosemary would have to perform a very complex and graceful curtsy in front of the king and queen. For Rosemary, who already struggled with coordination and felt nervous in social situations, this was a terrifying challenge. She practiced over and over because she knew her parents expected her to be perfect. On the big day, she wore a beautiful gown and walked into the grand ballroom. But in a moment of panic, she almost tripped, just barely catching her balance. The king and queen were polite and acted like they didn't see it, but the near mistake showed just how much pressure she was under. The fear of embarrassing herself and her family was a constant weight on her shoulders. The following year, Rosemary continued to attend high society events. She went to the coronation of the new pope in Rome and visited the White House. Officially, she was a successful debutante and a part of the amazing Kennedy story. But her new fame also created new problems. Society magazines wanted to write articles about the beautiful Kennedy daughter. Her parents became even more worried. They were afraid that if she gave a real interview, she would reveal her disabilities. So, they carefully controlled every piece of information about her. They made up fake stories for the magazines, saying Rosemary wanted to be a kindergarten teacher or an actress. These were complete lies, of course, but they were lies the Kennedys felt were necessary to protect the family's image. A mind in turmoil, the onset of a crisis. By 1940, from the outside, it looked like Rosemary was on top of the world. Her debut in England had been a big success, but under the surface, something inside her was changing. When she returned home, her mental and emotional health started to get much worse. Her younger sister, Eunice, said that it was like Rosemary's abilities declined overnight. The challenges she faced as a child were now turning into something much more terrifying. As Rosemary grew from a teenager into a young woman, she started to have scary symptoms. She began having seizures, or at least some kind of violent convulsions that happened more and more often. These moments left her confused, scared, and sometimes unable to move. But the physical problems were only part of a bigger, more disturbing change. Her whole personality started to shift. Her sweet, gentle nature was replaced by unpredictable and sometimes violent anger. She would get enraged over very small things and would sometimes physically attack family members. Her parents, who were obsessed with their perfect public image, became desperate. So, they fell back on their old strategy, hide the problem, and try to control her. They sent her to a summer camp in Massachusetts, hoping this phase would just go away, but that plan was destined to fail. Rosemary was expelled from the camp because she couldn't control her behavior. They then sent her to a boarding school in Philadelphia, but she only lasted a few months there. Her parents were at the end of their ropes. Seeing their carefully built world at risk, Joseph and Rose decided they needed to take a more drastic step. They sent Rosemary to another convent school, similar to the one she attended as a teen. But this time, things were completely different. Rosemary was now an adult. She had experienced a small taste of freedom, and she was not going to be locked away so easily. The problem started right away. Instead of quietly following the rules of the convent, Rosemary rebelled. She started sneaking out at night, which horrified the nuns and panicked her parents. They suspected she was going out to meet men in town. The thought of Rosemary getting pregnant was an unthinkable scandal for the family. A scandal like that could ruin the political careers they were planning for her brothers. This fear drove her father, Joseph, to make a decision that would change everything forever. In his mind, he needed a permanent solution to protect his family's future. The horrific choice: lobotomy. Back in the 1940s, people didn't understand mental illness very well, and there was a lot of shame around it. There were very few effective treatments, but a new and chilling medical procedure was becoming popular: the lobotomy. It was advertised as a miracle cure for people with behavioral problems. The surgery involved cutting connections in the front part of the brain to calm a person down. Joseph Kennedy, who was known as a man who liked to find a quick, final solution to a problem, saw the lobotomy as the perfect answer for Rosemary. But the science behind it was very questionable, and the risk of disaster was enormous. In November 1941, when Rosemary Kennedy was 23 years old, she was taken to have a prefrontal lobotomy. The surgery was done by Dr. James Watts and Dr. Walter Freeman, who were famous for performing this controversial procedure. The details of the surgery are horrifying. While they operated, the doctors had Rosemary stay awake. They asked her to recite prayers, sing "God Bless America," or count backward. They would keep cutting into her brain with a special instrument until her speech became jumbled and made no sense. That was their signal that they had cut enough. It was a terrifying and barbaric ordeal, and it showed a shocking lack of concern for Rosemary as a human being. After the gruesome surgery was finished, Rosemary was sent home to recover. It didn't take long for her family to realize that something had gone terribly and permanently wrong. A life erased, the aftermath. Before the lobotomy, Rosemary had mood swings and fits of anger, but she was still a functioning person. After the surgery, she was a tragic, broken figure. As the days and weeks went on, it became painfully clear that she wasn't getting better. She was much, much worse. The doctors had cut too much. Her mental ability dropped to the level of a small child. She could barely speak, and when she did, the words were mostly impossible to understand. All the years of hard work to teach her to read, write, and be a part of society were destroyed in a single brutal moment. Her mind, her personality, her very self had been tragically erased. The horror didn't stop there. The surgery also destroyed her physical control. She could no longer walk on her own and often needed a wheelchair or someone to help her. She also lost control of her bladder. The beautiful, though troubled, young woman was now completely dependent on others for everything. For a family that valued strength and independence above all else, this was a living nightmare. Joseph Kennedy, the man who made the decision, reacted in his typical way. He got rid of the problem. In fact, he had not even told his wife Rose about his plan to have Rosemary lobotomized until after the surgery was already done. Now, facing the undeniable and heartbreaking results, Joseph and Rose did what they had always done. They denied the problem and hid it away. They pretended it never happened, and they sent Rosemary away. First, they sent her to a private hospital in New York. Then, they moved her to the St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Jefferson, Wisconsin. This would be her home for the rest of her life. At St. Coletta, the Kennedys made sure she was completely isolated. They even built her a private house on the grounds, which people called the Kennedy Cottage. It was a place designed to keep her hidden from the world. Rosemary's life became simple, small, and incredibly lonely. Two nuns became her main caretakers. Her days were filled with simple activities: a ride in a car, a supervised walk with a dog, or making pottery. It might sound peaceful, but it was really a beautiful prison. For decades, her parents hardly ever visited her. It's reported that her mother, Rose, did not see her for over 20 years. Most of her siblings, who were told very little about what truly happened to her, also stayed away. Rosemary, the first daughter of America's most famous family, was living a secret life of complete solitude. The physical damage from the lobotomy was made even worse by the emotional pain of being abandoned by her own family. The truth, revealed partially, and karma's reckoning. In 1961, Joseph Kennedy finally achieved his life's greatest goal. His son, John F. Kennedy, was elected President of the United States. Feeling that his family dynasty was now secure, Joseph decided it was safe to tell the public a small part of the truth. He announced that his daughter, Rosemary, had been put in an institution because of mental issues, but he intentionally left out the most important detail: the lobotomy. His confession was just another half-truth, carefully designed to protect the family's image. This ensured that the full horror of what he had done remained a secret. But life has a funny and sometimes cruel way of working out. Later that same year, Joseph Kennedy suffered a massive stroke. Just like Rosemary, his mind was damaged and he lost the ability to speak clearly and walk properly. It was a terrible event for the family, but it had an unexpected result. Because he was now incapacitated himself, Joseph finally allowed his other children to learn where Rosemary was living. It took his own personal tragedy to finally begin to lift the curtain of secrecy, allowing Rosemary's siblings to finally see their lost sister again. Joseph Kennedy died in 1969. He had lived long enough to see two of his sons, John and Robert, assassinated. It was only after his death that the family's tight grip of control finally loosened. The surviving Kennedy children, including Jean, Eunice, Patricia, and Ted, began to visit Rosemary regularly at St. Coletta. Despite the horrible way she had been treated, Rosemary was a fighter. Over the many decades she spent at St. Coletta, she had made her own quiet progress. She worked incredibly hard to learn how to walk again, and though she always had a limp, she regained her mobility. Her speech never truly came back, but she found other ways to communicate. Her spirit had survived, even after all the damage that had been done. Even in her broken state, Rosemary found a way to have a peaceful life, showing a strength that her family had never believed she had. A lingering shadow and a powerful legacy. Even today, the full story of Rosemary Kennedy is surrounded by unanswered questions. Because her family was so secretive, we may never know the true nature of her early disabilities. Some experts now believe she may not have had an intellectual disability at all, but rather a mental illness like depression, which was made worse by the oxygen deprivation at her birth. Even one of the doctors who performed the lobotomy, Dr. James Watts, said years later that he didn't think she had a true intellectual disability. This means the entire procedure, which was driven by her father's fear and ambition, might have been a tragic mistake based on a wrong diagnosis. It was a mistake that cost Rosemary her life as she knew it. Before the surgery, Rosemary kept diaries. Her writings show a young woman who was a bit socially awkward, but who lived a relatively normal life full of parties and high society events. Her diary entries, like one she wrote to her father that said, "Darling Daddy, I'm so fond of you and I love you so much," do not sound like they were written by someone who was violent or severely disabled. It seems that her biggest fault in the eyes of her family was simply being different. She just didn't fit into the perfect competitive mold of a Kennedy. Her story was kept a secret for decades, but once it came out, it forced people to look at the dark side of the Kennedy family's ambition. The last dab. In the end, Rosemary Kennedy's life was part of the so-called Kennedy curse, but her tragedy was a silent and personal one, different from the violent deaths of her famous brothers. But out of her profound sacrifice, something good was born. Her legacy came from the love and tireless work of her sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver. Inspired by what happened to Rosemary, Eunice founded the Special Olympics in the 1960s. It became a worldwide movement that celebrates the abilities and talents of people with intellectual disabilities. Rosemary was the quiet inspiration behind it all. Rosemary Kennedy, the hidden princess of an American dynasty, outlived many of her famous siblings. She died peacefully from natural causes in 2005 at the age of 86. Her surviving siblings were by her side. Her life was filled with unimaginable pain and secrecy, but it ultimately led to more compassion and understanding in the world. Rosemary's story is not just a sad tale of a hidden tragedy. It is also a story about the strength of the human spirit and the power of acceptance. It was a lesson her family learned far too late, but one the world should never forget. Her life is a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is not found in power or perfection, but in their basic human dignity.